My pleasure, Darren. Look forward.
No, we have a lot of interesting material to cover. And of course, we want to hear about your condition and the persecution of you and your supporters in particular. And obviously more about the plot to remove you from power by the Pakistani deep state and maybe even elements of the US government. But before all of that, I'd like to take us back to the journey leading to July 26, 2018, the date you were elected prime minister. Now, as I alluded to, you defeated two entrenched political dynasties and families, Bhutto and Sharif, in your electoral victory. Can you please explain to the audience what it meant for someone not from these families or from the military to rule Pakistan? What was the agenda you ran on, and what are your proudest accomplishments in office?
Well, Darren, I formed my Movement for Justice. That was my party 27 years ago. And reason I called it Movement for Justice is because, you know, being a student of politics, political history, and especially my getting exposure as a teenager to England, where I went to study, and as well as I used to play professional sport, I found out that the only difference between prosperous countries and poor countries is rule of law. Countries that have a just system, where there is where the weak are protected from the strong by the constitution and the judiciary, and where the powerful are brought under the rule of law, they prosper. Those countries forge ahead of other countries, which, despite all the resources, remain poor because they do not have rule of law. So hence I call my party Movement for Justice. But when you try and bring the powerful under the control, bringing them under the law, that means you're taking on powerful mafias who are benefiting from a corrupt system. So, so when they are not going to give up control easily because they are beneficiaries, and they're from power, and power brings in money, and they're above law. They can break the law and get away with it. So this is not just the problem, Darren, with Pakistan. Basically, it is the problem with the entire developing world. The poor countries are poor because they cannot bring the powerful elites under the law. And so the elites of the poor countries siphon off, plunder the country, take their wealth and take them to offshore accounts and Western capitals. So basically, the poor countries are being plundered by their ruling elites because they're above law. So this was my struggle, and I was always going to come up against those powerful elites who did not want to be brought under the law. And that's what I am facing right now.
Indeed, indeed. And unfortunately, I'd have to say it's not only an issue with developing countries. We certainly have our own issues with deep corruption in the United States as well, which maybe we could get into later. And before we move on, I'm just curious, what are some of your proudest accomplishments while in office, some of the struggles that you had economically, and maybe some of the progress you made in combating this deeply entrenched corruption that you speak of?
Well, first, let me tell you where I failed. I failed to bring the powerful under the law because, unfortunately, while I had the responsibility, the actual veto power belonged to the army chief. And he was not interested in accountability of the powerful. So because he was not interested, I'm afraid I failed there because I had a weak government. In other words, in a parliamentary democracy, if you have a coalition government with a very thin majority, then it is very difficult to make powerful decisions because, you can always be destabilized. And in the end, we were destabilized by the powerful. They destabilized my government, and so I was removed. But that is where I failed. I mean, I'm saying I failed in bringing rule of law because I just did not have a strong enough government in a parliamentary democracy. But I guess my biggest achievement was dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. Remember, it ravaged most of the world, and it ravaged two of our neighbors. I mean, India suffered massively from COVID-19, and so did Iran on the other side, on the east and west. But Pakistan was one of the 3 top countries in the world which handled the pandemic the best. We saved our people from the devastating impact on our hospitals. Remember, the hospitals were overrun. In Pakistan, our hospitals were never overrun the way we dealt with it. But we also saved our economy. I mean, we were the ones to recover the fastest from the impact of on the economy of the pandemic. And also, we saved our poor people, because pandemic really caused a lot of poverty. Because when you lock down, basically people go out of work. And in Pakistan, we had informal labor, not registered. We had weekly, daily wages. So the moment you lock down, I mean, these people, who need to make money to feed their families, where were they going to go? So we dealt with it, probably one of the countries that dealt with it the best. And then also we inherited a bankrupt economy. And our last 2 years were considered that one of the best performing economies in Pakistan in 17 years. So from a bankrupt economy, we actually performed the best, and actually recently endorsed in few days back, the IMF endorsed the way we lifted our economy from a bankrupted one.
Yes, no, that's a great accomplishment. And what you were saying earlier about corruption, it reminds me, I think on another occasion, you pointed out that it's critical for a leader who has responsibility to also wield authority. And you can speak to your own case, but from what I've seen in other countries, including the case of the United States, when a leader is extremely popular, has profound support of the people, it's very unfortunate when the institutions and the bureaucracies don't cooperate, because that creates a condition where the elected leader with the support and love of the people does not have the authority to do what the people elected him to do. And one kind of pithy saying I picked up from a book of yours is that it's impossible to rule Pakistan without these 3 A's: Allah, Army, and America. And we'll leave aside 2 A's for the moment and just talk about one of these institutions, which is the Army and the intelligence services that you mentioned. My understanding is in the beginning, you had a fairly good relationship with these institutions, or at least not an acrimonious one. At some point, though, the relationship turned, leading to your ouster, effectively. Could you explain a little bit, in your view, what soured between you and at least certain elements within the Army and intelligence services in Pakistan?
Well, just before, I wanted to mention 2 other things which I was quite proud of. One was we started a huge environmental campaign of replanting trees in Pakistan. We called it the 10 billion tree tsunami. And so that was acknowledged internationally, that it was one of the best initiatives to fight climate change. And Pakistan is quite vulnerable there. We are in the top 10 countries which are most likely to be affected by climate change. And secondly, what I was quite proud of, we actually had one of the best programs, again acknowledged internationally, for uplifting people out of poverty, and that was called our SAS program. And that too was acknowledged by everyone, where we tried to give a cushion to the most vulnerable part of our population. And my idea was basically to move on to make Pakistan a welfare state, and we provided health insurance. Now, for every family in Pakistan, we provided them 1 million rupees so that they could go to any hospital to get treated. So this is for a country where you have large number of poor people or vulnerable people, which in case of Pakistan is almost 100 million, then this is the biggest gift, a blessing that you can give people health cover. Bearing in mind that we still, much richer countries than us did not come up with a program like our health insurance. Now coming down to the question you've asked me. Look, in Pakistan, for 70 years, the army has basically been either directly ruling us through martial laws, or indirectly, basically because they've been entrenched. And, to be fair, the army has been hugely popular in Pakistan because, we started off as independence in 47, but 1948 was our first conflict with India. And India being 7 times the size of Pakistan, we grew up with insecurity that will we survive as a nation? So the over dependence on the army, and army was popular in Pakistan, and even martial laws when they were imposed sometimes were greeted with people celebrated a martial law. But gradually over a period of time, and specifically in the last 20 years, the realization came in this country, and as your thought process evolves through your past experiences, the idea that yes, martial law, we used to welcome them, but it was like dealing with cancer with discipline. Because for a while it seemed good, but after a while, the country would always go on the wrong track. Because basically, martial law is not the answer to a problem. The answer to a problem is genuine democracy, is rule of law. Countries that prosper always prosper because they have rule of law, genuine democracy, a government that represents people and is accountable to the people, and above all, human rights. A government that protects the rights, fundamental rights of its people, in fact, liberates them, or it liberates the potential of our people. So therefore, this is the realization that came in, especially in the last 20 years.